subscribe.
Hi everybody and welcome back. My name's Alison, the online piano and the online violin tutor. Today I'm going to talk to you about why scales in music are so important. Now this goes for the violin, the piano, for any instrument, for anything, singing, the lot, whatever, you name it. Why are scales important? Okay, so scales are important because first of all they help with intonation. So intonation is the pitch or the tuning. So on the violin you don't know where the notes are going to go necessarily, because it could be anywhere along the fingerboard. So as you're going up and down the scales and things, this is going to help you get to know where your fingers are going to be going on the fingerboard. As having said that though, the same goes when you're actually on the piano as well. I've got a piano behind me, which is why I'm pointing down here. So the same thing goes with the piano as well. Even though you're not using it as such, you're not using the scales for intonation in the same way that you would be in the violin. It's good for the intonation of your ear and getting that inner pitch sorted out for you, because then you'll be able to hear, you will, because you're learning in a scale, you'll know what the next note up is, then you'll be able to jump notes, and it helps in those sorts of ways for the piano. So two different ways in intonation, I mean, for the different instruments. But needless to say, the scales are very good for helping your intonation. Scales help get to know your key signature. For example, if you were doing the scale of G major, you would know that all of the notes are just normal, natural notes, G, A, B, C. But when you come to the F, that's going to be an F sharp. So that when you come to a piece of music with one sharp in it, which will be F sharp, you will know that you are in the key of G, therefore, or assuming it's G major, or we'll just go with major rather than minor, so it'll just be easier. You will know that you're in the key of G major. Now you remember where you had to put your fingers when you did a G major scale, were they stretched or back, and were they on the dot, and or you know whatever place your fingers were in, however you work that, then that's when you come to play that piece of music in the key of G with that one F sharp in, you will know exactly where to put your fingers. Exactly the same thing for the piano. You will know when to hit a white note and when to hit a black note. So on the piano, F sharp is a black note. So if you're in the key of G, you'll know that all of the rest of the notes, A, B, C, D, E, G, A, etc., they're all going to be the white notes on the piano until you come to an F, which you know is going to be the only black note that you're going to be playing. Obviously, the piece of music might contain other sharps, flats and naturals and things, but I mean, I'm just talking about the key signature in general. So the scales are very good to help to get to know them, and generally we don't learn all the scales all at once. There's 36 scales in total, so we generally don't learn them all in one go, because some of them are just so ridiculously difficult that you couldn't do them at beginner level. So generally your pieces would move up at the same level as your scales. So if you were doing for grade 1, for example, the scale of C, G, D major, whatever, your pieces would be in those corresponding keys as well, so that you're not learning really difficult scales, but you're not putting that into practice with the pieces. Some scales have, 4, 5, 6, 7 sharps in. To play a piece of music that has 4, 5, 6, 7 sharps in is very, very difficult. So the level of scales moves up with obviously the difficulty. Right, the third reason is you can use them for various techniques to help you learn things. So for example, on the violin, I use scales if I want to, or for example, if I was teaching vibrato, maybe, I might say to someone that start to do a scale, but you can put vibrato in it. Or something like that, for example. So rather than trying to put vibrato or any particular technique, any bowing technique, whatever technique it is you're doing on the piano or your corresponding instrument, when you try to put that into pieces, because you're too busy concentrating on the piece and trying to get the piece right itself, that trying to do the technique on top of that is often very, very difficult to do. So what I would suggest is that you go back to basics and try those techniques out on the scales first, because you're not actually having to concentrate on playing a scale, because you know it's just going to be the next note up so on the piano you're just going to be using 1, 2, 3, then you tuck under, thumb, and carry on with the rest of the fingers, which is pretty much the same in the violin. You start on an open string, finger 1, 2, 3, the next open string, 1, 2, 3, the next. So you don't actually, the brain actually doesn't have to concentrate on what the fingers and what the sound is making. The brain can then just focus purely on that particular technique that you're working on. Okay, number 4, scales are very good because they help with your fingering. So This is especially true on the piano. So if you know your scales, you know what I'm talking about. If you were to do a scale, you start with your thumb, and then finger 2, finger 3, and then you tuck your thumb under and carry on with the rest of the fingers. If you wanted to go up 2 octaves, you tuck your thumb again under 4. But when you have scales that appear in pieces of music, so Mozart would be a typical example of that. When you have scales in pieces, they become much easier to play because you've learnt to do the fingering and the scales properly. Same really goes for the violin, that when you do scales, you can use them to jump up into position. So when you do D major, a 2 octave D major scale has to go into 3rd position halfway through. So it helps you when you're changing positions if you've got scalic runs in your violin pieces as well. And I'm sure the same goes for clarinet, flute, that kind of thing. Okay, it's number 5. Scales are great for sight reading as you can translate the notes quicker. Sorry if I'm looking down the front of the camera. I do like making notes, otherwise I forget to mention important points to you guys. So yeah, great for sight reading just because you can translate notes quicker. So if you're used to looking at scales and you know how scales go, you know how they are on your instrument, it's just sometimes much easier to translate notes because you can see them moving up in scales and things. It's the fundamentals, is what music's made up. That's actually my next point with it, that scales are the building blocks of music. So point 5 and 6 kind of go together in that every piece of music is made up of scales and arpeggios, chromatics, and all the kind of technical work that you have to do. Otherwise it would just be random kind of music, which makes that kind of music much harder to learn. So if you are good at doing your technical stuff, your scales, arpeggios, broken chords, chromatics, and all that jazz, then it makes it much easier to sight read because you can recognise, oh yes, that's an arpeggio, oh yeah, that's a scale, yeah, that's a chromatic. So the fingerings that you've been used to doing for those, and even the keys that you've been used to practising those scales in, will help translate much easier for the sight reading. So then number 6, the building blocks of music. So like I said, point 5 and 6 go hand in hand together. So everything is made up of scales and arpeggios and things, otherwise it would just be random. Okay, number 7, dexterity and fluidity of the fingers. So when I get a new student, for example, probably more so on the piano, first thing I do is when they come through the door from a complete beginner, no matter what age they are, I get them doing a scale. On the violin it's a bit different because doing a scale on the violin is a lot more complicated, and we can't really do that yet until you've got the hang of holding it and getting the position to play in. So it works. I teach differently when I teach the piano to the violin, at least to start with anyway, until it kind of evens itself up a little bit. So I find that, especially when I get kids, their dexterity is not so great, and everybody's hands are down, or the fingers are flat and that kind of thing. So if I get them doing scales, they will come back a week later, they'll have nailed all the scales, and their hands will be in the correct position on the keys, and it will look like they've been playing for years. So I use scales as not only something to get them off and going and get them used to the keys and the sound of it and everything, but it's also to get the nice hand position and just get the nice fluidity of the fingers moving nice, rather than trying to do their own fingering. That if I just gave them a scale and put no fingering on, they'd probably do some really awkward fingering. So it just helps with the dexterity and the fluidity there. Number 8, coordination. When you do hands together on the piano for scales, which is actually quite difficult because one hand is doing completely different fingering to the other ones, because our hands are like a mirror image of each other, unfortunately for us. But it really does help with the coordination. So when you do something like a piece of Bach or Mozart or something like that, then it's much easier because you're used to one hand doing one thing and the other hand doing another thing. I suppose the same sort of thing is in the violin, because you've got one hand operating the bow and you've got one hand operating the fingers. So again, it's going to help really just cement the bowing technique. So as I said before in whatever point it was, point 3 I think it was, where I said it helps with various techniques and things. You can go back to doing the scales while you can polish up the bowing technique, because you don't have to worry about what the left hand is doing, because it's just doing one finger after another. Number 9, timing. Scales can help with timing. So if you're having problems playing with a metronome, or you just want to build on your inner metronome, scales are very good for doing that, rather than just... You you can almost... You can almost just use them just to, I was rushing a little bit on the first one, so that's why I didn't sound right, because I was just exaggerating the motion. But rather than having them all out of time and you know, doing whatever you want to do, you can use them to keep the timing stable, so you can get them going faster, or use them to slow down. You know, whatever you want to do. So you can really help the scales to help with your timing, or you can do them in different rhythms. Again, that kind of goes back to using the scales for technique as well. And so the final point would be you can use scales as a warm-up. So on the piano especially, I normally say to students, why don't you just start with a few scales just to warm the old fingers up, and then you're good to go with the pieces. It's very difficult to sometimes, especially going into playing something very, very fast and that's very finger work, like without actually having warmed up as well. So no more than you would hear a singer going la 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 la, doing their arpeggios to just warm up and stretch the voice a little bit. It's the same sort of thing in the violin. I sometimes do scales and things if I just want to get my fingers a bit warmer so I can get them moving, rather than going boom straight into playing Zardas or something, which is very well known for being quite fast and moving on at a hefty pace. So there you go, 10 reasons why scales are important. I hope this makes sense, and I hope you've enjoyed watching this video. Please do subscribe, like the video and all that kind of good stuff, and I will see you all in the next video.
Subscribe.